Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share paranormal hospital horror stories. First story. I saw hell in the hospital hallway. Sorry in advance for the long post. I'll be calling myself Sarah, and I work at a hospital in upstate New York as a nurse. I was originally from Pennsylvania, but just recently moved towards the Big Apple for a change of pace and scenery. I love doing my job because I genuinely love helping people, but something started happening here recently that has made me rethink my plans of staying here. There are tons of stories of the hospital I work at. There's one story of a man who was admitted one evening because he collapsed at his construction job. When a doctor came to examine him, he told the man that he would have to stay a while to run some tests. Well, time passed, and he got much worse. He could barely breathe, and he was in immense pain. When the results finally came back, they had told the man that he had asbestosis, a condition that scars the lungs from breathing in asbestos fibers from his work. Unfortunately, that was not uncommon back then. Well, the man didn't take the news very well. He was in pain, and he didn't want to allow the disease to eat away at him any longer. It was later that night when he walked towards his door and looked to see if the hallways were empty. There was an eerie silence around him and no other signs of life in his vicinity. The man proceeded to get on his knees and place his neck on the door frame. Using all of his strength, the man proceeded to slam the wooden door onto his neck over and over and over. Slam, 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 crack. It was an instant, and the man was in a crazed stupor as he continuously slammed the door onto his neck. Blood splattered everywhere as the sound of flesh tearing and bones breaking filled the hallways. His labored breaths began to gurgle as his throat began to fill with crimson. A short time later, some nurses had found his mess of a body, and their screams carried into the night. Apparently, that floor isn't used anymore, and you can still hear the door slam. I've been there and done that. I get it. It's fun to scare the newbies when they arrive, especially the ones on night shift. I'm sure this place has some history, but I doubted the existence of the supernatural wandering the hospital. At first, when they told me about the ghosts, I chuckled and brushed it off, but when my CNO, Chief Nursing Officer, insisted for me to be careful my first night, I thought I'd pretend to take it a bit more seriously. I ended up going weeks without experiencing a single thing aside from the normal crazy of just working in a hospital, especially during COVID. With the massive influx of patients following the pandemic, we had to clean up and open up every room that we had, even the previously mentioned and used floor. It was one night I was going through the halls, and I had to investigate a noise. It was a weekend during the absolute craziness of the pandemic, and we were all being spread thin. We all had to go to areas where we usually wouldn't go to, but it was okay. We were all focused on getting these patients situated. I was taking care of an area that didn't have any COVID patients. This was the floor we recently opened up. We had a patient who I'll call Jack, an older gentleman who was brought in because he had some chest pains. I came into Jack's room one night, and he asked me if I could give him anything to help him sleep. When he first came in a few days ago, he was extremely bright and chipper despite his condition. But tonight he was pale and shaking. That concerned me, and I asked him if his chest pains were keeping him up at night, and he just looked at me with small tears forming in the corners of his eyes. He shuddered as he told me that someone keeps coming into his room at night. This was my first time hearing about anything like this, so I asked if he could tell me more. Jack downcast his eyes as he began to rub his shaking hands together. He told me that late at night, he would hear his door open and slam shut. He would wake up and see a dark figure crawling towards him. Now I asked if it was another nurse that we had, but Jack was sure it wasn't them. Jack described the figure as a large man with short white hair. His mouth was open, and he said that blood was slowly trickling out of it. He began to shiver a bit as he continued to describe what he saw. Jack continued by telling me that the man was in an old hospital gown, but it was worn with splatters of blood on it. He began to close his eyes as he told me the man's neck was crooked and broken. The flesh on the neck was torn open to reveal shattered bone. I felt sorry for the man. I assumed that he had more issues than just chest pains, so I assured him that I would get someone to check off something that would help him. I had to make my rounds to check on other patients, but I told him I would check on him again soon. As I closed the door to his room, I could hear him quickly shuffle back on his bed. I made my way around the hall toward the other patients. They all complained about losing sleep, not from a man visiting them at night, but the sound of a door slamming in the hallway. I talked to some other nurses about it, and their faces were in absolute shock. They didn't want to listen to any more and told me I shouldn't be trying to scare them. I didn't know what else to do, but maybe it was just a coincidence. After forcing down a can of Red Bull and a cup of coffee, I looked at my watch. It was around 3 a.m., so I wanted to go and check on the patients. I walked toward the elevator and pressed the button to go up toward the old floor. I forced a laugh as I remembered Jack's account of the man he saw. One of the old stories about the man who killed himself, and a few other tales the other nurses had told me. I didn't want to scare myself, but the description of the figure and the fear I saw in Jack's eyes, that very fear began to slowly sink into me. The elevator doors slowly creaked open, and I was met with a dimly lit hallway. We had to save on power, so late at night, we wouldn't have all of the lights on. As I walked through towards the hall, the lights began to flicker. The fluorescent lamps began to buzz as my footsteps slowly echoed through the hallway. I saw something at the end of the hall from one of the rooms, Jack's room. Something was peering at me from the bottom of the doorway. Only the top of their head was visible, but I was able to make out a thin tuft of white hair atop a man's head. As the lights flicked, the flashes of light hit their face, and I could see their eyes glow white. I could hear my breath begin to shudder as I stared towards the head, and I could hear another breath. It sounded as if someone was taking short breaths while submerged in water. The quick inhales were low, and I could hear something snap with each labored breath. I jumped as a sudden slam erupted from their direction, and suddenly another, and another. The sound of a door slamming began to echo throughout the hallway, and each time it slammed, I could hear something squish, something snap, something tear. I wanted to let out a scream, but nothing would come out. Was I having some kind of waking nightmare? Hallucination? Has my mind conjured some sort of phantom from all of those damn stories? Before I was able to let out my own, a yell could be heard down the hall from Jack's room. His cry of terror made my blood run cold as ice. Then another scream, and another scream, all coming from the other patients' rooms. The sound came rushing towards me, a dark symphony of horrified cries resonating into my skull. My legs shook, and I fell onto my knees, trying desperately to mute the sound by covering my ears. My head was ringing, and I felt blood running down my nostrils. Tears began to flood my eyes, and when I screamed, I couldn't hear anything at all. I was completely drowned in screams. I looked forward and I saw the head slowly move out of the doorway. When it fully emerged from Jack's room, I could see that it was indeed in an old hospital gown. It was on the floor, propping itself up on its legs and arms. Each limb was bending in an inhuman way, like the legs of a spider, the way the joints shot up and bent downwards. The figure's head was bent, broken, and it swayed back and forth as its eyes flashed white from the flickering of the lights. Each time its neck sways, it splatters dark red blood onto the walls. It was looking towards me with its mouth slack-jawed. Despite being surrounded by screams, I could faintly hear its blood-soaked inhales. It just stared at me, and I began to slowly shuffle backwards towards the elevator doors. That's when it began to step towards me, and each time it got closer, the dimming lights behind it would pop and shatter. It crept towards me, slowly, while the darkness followed behind it. I was sure I was in hell at this point as the screams got louder, the figure creeping closer, and the darkness covering the hallway. It was only a few feet away from me now. Its limbs groaned and cracked as it moved closer and closer. I'll never forget how its white eyes stayed fixed upon me as its broken neck swayed back and forth with its jaw hanging down to reveal a small flow of blood. My back was completely on the elevator door, and it was so close to me. It began to scramble over me. Its bent spider-like arms were on either side of me, and it pushed its face closer to mine. All I could see were its rotten, pale face, and behind it, a dark abyss. I couldn't hear anything anymore. The screams must have deafened me. But I pushed my head into the elevator door and closed my eyes tightly as it got even closer. I could feel a cold breath brush my cheeks. I suddenly fell backwards and my head fell onto the floor of the elevator. I looked up to see another nurse, May, looking down at me, confused. She saw that I was white as a sheet and quickly got down to examine me. Blood was trickling out of my nose and ears and tears were gushing out of my eyes. I could barely speak. All that came out were cries. I looked towards the hallway, and it was dimly lit with all of the doors closed. May rushed me out of there and had a doctor go out his way to look at me. I had to take a week off of work. I was a complete mess, and when I finally recovered, I vowed to not speak of it again. Out of sight, out of mind. I never saw that figure again. There's whispers, of course, from the staff saying that I saw a ghost. I'm just too afraid to admit to what I saw. What scares me the most is that it was just one story. There are many, many more that are echoing through this hospital, and I'm terrified to see the worst of them. Second story, Haunted Children's Hospital. I am a new night shift CNA at my local children's hospital and have heard some stories from nurses and other assistants that are worth mentioning. Shortly before I began, a CNA was at her station on the computer. She was alone at this time since the other CNA was out doing rounds and wouldn't be back for at least 15 minutes. As she's working away, something catches the corner of her eye, enough for her to look in that direction, which was looking into an empty room. The room itself was lightly lit so as to make it easier for a new patient to come in at any time, but no one was assigned to that room. Before she turns back to the computer, she sees a young boy with blonde hair and in a gown walk from behind the slightly drawn curtain to the bathroom. From what I heard, she instantly freaked out and went to find nurses, all of which confirmed the room was empty, but she insisted she saw someone walk into the bathroom. They check, and it's empty. She is so distraught they actually tell her to go home and take it easy. It is also common knowledge that a woman is often seen walking through a specific hallway, and even seen during the day. There is also a story of when a security guard and several staff heard a phantom infant crying in an empty room. They checked the cameras, and sure enough, the room was empty. When they opened the door, the crying would stop, but then resume shortly after closing the door again. I have worked several night shifts now and have yet to encounter anything myself. The creepiest so far has been the child laughing while asleep in a dark room. It's not expected and incredibly uncomfortable initially, then it's a little cute. Another time a grandmother was staying overnight and was straight up talking in her sleep. It sounded like she was having a conversation with someone while facing the wall. Again, creepy when you don't expect it, especially in a dark room. Third story. I bought the house I died in as a child. I was 6 when I died. I lived in an old detached house in Surrey. Southwick House, it was called. It was a Victorian property. My parents bought it from a very old couple who hadn't lived in it for decades. And as such, it had a lot of old furniture they kept that had been present in the house since it was built. My dad was a leading heart surgeon based out of London, so my parents were pretty wealthy, and our house reflected that. It wasn't a mansion or anything. It was modest compared to other properties in the county, but it was a very nice house. Big gardens, a fountain out back that rose out of an obsidian pond in which my mom kept a few koi. I'd stand there for hours as a kid, just staring into the black mirrored surface, looking for golden glimpses of those marvelous fish. I'd explore the rest of the garden too, endlessly creeping through the flower beds, playing in the woods that bordered the property. Summers filled with scraped knees and dirty clothes, myself and my friends building forts and exploring our own little world. It wasn't the grounds or the pond that killed me, but it was my inquisitiveness. Much like many old English properties of its type, Southwick House had 2 main living floors and an attic. Unlike many English properties, it also had a cellar. Dad used to store wine at the start of the cellar, which was made up of a few roughly hewn rooms that smelled of earth and roots. Beyond his wine rack, however, the cellar was basically unused except for storing the kind of detritus that a family acquires, never has any need for, but doesn't want to dispose of anyway. I was alone the day I decided to explore the cellar. It was one of Dad's rare days off, and he and my mom were out in the garden, sunning themselves and reading. I came inside to escape the heat, and soon the typical 6-year-old boy boredom kicked in. So I decided to explore the cellar. It wasn't that I was scared of the cellar or anything. I just didn't like the smell, and I kept away from going down there, knowing that the contents were largely boring, and I'd be met with little more than empty rooms. I don't know what possessed me to change my mind that day, but change my mind I did. As I'd expected, there was really nothing of interest in the cellar. Even my family's old possessions were just broken bits of furniture and clothes that my older sister had grown out of and Mum hadn't yet donated to Oxfam. I was about to leave the cellar and return to my room and my toys when something on the wall caught my eye. It was a square metal door, too high for me to reach. But, to my good fortune, a broken chair was nearby, so I dragged it across to this mysterious hatch, climbed up, and opened it to see what treasures awaited inside. As you can imagine, it was nothing exciting. It was in fact a fuse box. A very old, very poorly maintained fuse box. A fuse box that I, a curious child, began to meddle with. I don't know what I did exactly, what wire I touched, or connection I shorted to cause the jolt of electricity to flow into my body. All I can remember is suddenly feeling a white-hot, tingling pain unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I felt my body being thrust backwards, as if an unseen force had shoved me hard. I felt my spine hit the uneven concrete floor and the breath shoot out of me. Then I felt something I can only describe as a burning hand gripping my heart. That's when I blacked out. I died. I was clinically dead for 20 minutes. The electrocution shorted out my heart, and I lay there, actually dead, for a few minutes before my dad even found me. He could never explain why he came searching for me that day. All he ever told me was that he knew he had to check on me. And if he hadn't, I don't think I'd be alive today. My dad, the heart surgeon, began attempts to revive me while my mom called the paramedics. After another 15 minutes, which I'm sure must have felt like an eternity for my dad, the paramedics were able to successfully restart my heart. I woke up in hospital, painful burns covering a large portion of my body. My first thought was fear that I'd get in trouble for touching the thing in the cellar. And I was scolded, of course, but gently, and alongside gradual explanation of what had happened to me. At 6 years old, I don't think I fully grasped the severity of it, but two things I did understand. One, I was lucky to be alive, and two, I had died and come back. It was a miracle. I died for 20 minutes, and frankly, that made me feel a little bit of a badass. I like to say I had some kind of experience during the 20 minutes I died, but the truth is I didn't. Or, if I did, I don't remember it. No light at the end of the tunnel, no out-of-body experience. 1 minute I was dying, and the next minute I was alive again. In time, the whole event became something I told friends as a point of interest. The burns healed, and other than having regular heart monitoring, life went back to normal. When I was 12, Dad got a job working at a private hospital in the Southwest, and we moved. It was 22 years until I thought about that house again. It was a month after I turned 34. I'd followed my father into medicine and became a GP in Reading, near where I'd grown up as a child. I alternated between running NHS and private clinics. On the day in question, I'd worked particularly late at my NHS practice. When I got home, my girlfriend was waiting with a glass of wine and that look on her face that let me know she had something interesting to tell me. She was practically bursting to speak before I'd even taken my jacket off and loosened my tie. "I got the weirdest call today," Madeline, my girlfriend, said. I kissed her on the cheek and took her proffered glass of wine. "Oh yeah, some guy in Sussex. Said his family lives in your old house." I frowned. "What, Southwick?" Madeline nodded. I could see she had more to tell. "What did he want?" I asked. "He's been trying to track you down, apparently. Was trying to get hold of your parents, and obviously eventually found you. Both of my parents had died when I was in my 20s. They were old when they had me. Mom died of cancer, Dad ironically of a heart attack. My sister had long since emigrated to Canada, so it made sense that this guy had found me as the next port call. But why? I asked Madeline as much. Okay, so this is the interesting part. You want to know if anything weird happened to you when you lived at Southwick. Anything supernatural. My eyes widened. It most certainly had not. But my interest was piqued. I was a horror aficionado and a firm atheist, but I guess working as a GP particularly, I'd often said that I'd love to be proven wrong about the existence of an afterlife. Of course, I expected nothing of the sort from this guy, but I was intrigued nonetheless. I called the number Madeline had taken down. When Giles Robertson answered, his voice gave me pause. The man sounded exhausted, scared even. When I told him who I was, he let out an audible sigh of relief. I just need to know, he said, did you ever have any untoward experiences in that house? I told him that I hadn't. Nothing even remotely supernatural in feel had happened during my 12 years there. When I finished, Giles Robertson sounded disappointed. May I ask why? I inquired. You're going to think I'm crazy, Robertson said. It was an unusual, candid thing for a stranger to say, especially a man who sounded rather well-to-do. I assured him that, as a doctor, I knew the benefits of listening to and believing people. We moved a year ago. It's been happening nonstop ever since. My wife and I, we'd never seen anything, never heard anything. But we have 2 kids. Moira, she's 6, and William, he's 8. About a month after we moved in, they started talking about the burning boy. A young boy who'd come into their room and, well, at first he'd play with them. We thought it was an imaginary friend. Siblings can sometimes share imaginary friends. It's not unusual. Indeed, I said. I thought the name The Burning Boy was unusual, but hey, kids have interesting imaginations. So for months, everything was fine. We listened to their stories of the boy with polite smiles and nods. But lately, things have escalated. My children keep sleepwalking. We find them in the cellar, standing in front of the old fuse box. When we wake them, they claim to have no memory of how they got there, other than the burning boy led them there. We tried locking the cellar door, but somehow they still get in. I was beginning to feel concerned now. A burning boy? A fuse box? This was horribly personal. Now my wife and I, we can feel him too. The whole house smells of burning flesh and electricity. Just being inside the property makes our skin tingle. There's an inescapable atmosphere. It's like just walking through the door instills an unspeakable terror. And my children, they're afraid of the burning boy now. They say he wants them to do something, but they won't tell us what. We've sealed up the fuse box, but every night now we find them in front of it. And last week, my wife and I woke up down in the cellar with them. We put the property on the market, but as soon as anyone comes to view it, they leave and never call back. I don't know what to do. I don't want my family to stay here. I'm scared. I was hoping you could help. But what could I do or say? How would explaining my own childhood electrocution help this man? If what he said was true, and I was haunting the house, what on earth could he do about it? Hell, even I had no idea what it could really be. Nothing about it made sense or correlated with anything I knew about how ghosts should work. Then I looked at the property listing. I saw how, in their desperation, the Robertson family had listed the house for so much cheaper than the house was worth. And that's how I helped. I bought my childhood home. The chances of this being some weird scam were minimal. The Robertsons stood to lose a good few grand on the sale. I even gave them slightly more than the asking price. I could afford it. I guess I felt partly responsible, too. And I suppose my skepticism and nostalgia for the old house trumped any concern I had about it being haunted by, what? A specter of my very much living self? I was a fool. I don't know what it is or how it is, but there's something in this house. I persuaded Madeline to stay back at our apartment while I checked out the house for a few days. I don't know why I wanted to be alone there. I told her it was the memories. I think, deep down, I knew there was a reason to be afraid. On the first night, nothing happened. Everything was fine, and the next morning I lamented the Robertsons' loss and celebrated my acquisition of the house I'd so loved growing up in. The next night, I awoke in my childhood bedroom to the smell of singed flesh and hair. The atmosphere was electric, tingling through my body as a muggy, oppressive heat caused sweat to form on my brow. I sat up, ambiguously afraid of nothing in particular, until exhaustion took me a few hours later and I drifted back off. On the third night, I saw him. I awoke with a jolt to much the same smell and sensation. Only this time it was considerably stronger. And there, at the foot of my bed, stood the burning boy. It was me, there was no doubt about that. But the burns which covered his body were far worse than I had ever suffered. Smoke drifted from his pallid frame as he watched me with accusing eyes. There was no question that this specter had my face. But he was no ghost. How could be? I was the man this child had grown up to become, sitting there shivering in bed, a man of flesh and blood and very much living. The burning boy opened his mouth to reveal coal-black teeth and a rotten, stumpy tongue that twitched as he tried to speak. A foul miasma wafted towards me, that of electrical death, years-long decay. I gagged, too frozen with fear to leave my bed, too terrified to approach this phantom with my face. I don't know how long we held that staring contest. I don't know at what point I drifted off to sleep. All I remember is waking up the next morning, my sheets drenched with sweat and the faint smell of electricity searing the air. On the fourth night, I awoke in the cellar. My eyes snapped awake just in time to see my hand reaching out for the fuse box. At some point, the Robertsons had padlocked it, but now the padlock lay unlocked and discarded on the floor. I hadn't even been given the key. I couldn't see the burning boy, but I knew he was there behind me. I could sense him, smell him, could feel the electrical discharge coming off his terrifying tiny form, urging me forward. I could hear him snuffling and snorting. Laughter, I thought. With a cry, I snatched my hand away from that dreaded fuse box, ran upstairs, gathered up some things, and drove to a nearby hotel. The next day, I returned to the apartment I share with Madeline. I gave her some story about how living in the house would be too painful due to memories of my parents. I'm not sure if she believed me, but bless her, she let it go. I told her I planned to flip the property, knowing I never could. I could never willingly allow anyone, family or not, to be exposed to the burning boy. My plan was to keep the property empty and maybe one day bring myself to have it demolished and sell off the land. My plan isn't going to work. I started seeing the burning boy in my apartment. I started smelling his electric stench. Madeline never saw him, but she could smell him too, although not as strongly as I can. He would stand there in the corner, staring at me as if he wanted something. I suspected I knew what he wanted. It was pretty obvious. And when, one night, I woke up in the cellar of Southwick again, over 2 hours from the bed I'd fallen asleep in, I knew that the burning boy wouldn't stop until he got what he sought. Mercifully, it doesn't happen every night. Sometimes I have a week's reprieve, too, if I'm lucky. But eventually the burning boy returns, and eventually I wake up in that basement with no memory of how I got there, no memory of making the drive across the county. I don't know how to rid myself of him. I can't find a single thing in any paranormal literature that could help me. I can't turn to religion. I doubt he can be exorcised. He's not a ghost. I'm still alive. He shouldn't exist. Did a part of me die and come back? Could I ever have had that kind of malevolence inside of me that spawned this thing? I know he wants me to finish the job, to grip the fuse box, and let the current take me. And I won't lie, I've thought about doing just that every time I wake up in the cellar of that accursed house. But I have a horrible feeling about that, too. You see, it clearly wasn't just me that the burning boy wanted. He was after the Robertsons, too, after all. And here's the thing. I found out last weekend that the entire Robertson family was killed in their new home. I don't know how they died, not yet, but I do know it was a freak accident. I can hazard a guess at the nature of that accident. And the day they died, it was the day before the burning boy began appearing in my apartment, far from Southwick House. So here's my problem. I think if I do ever reach out for that fuse box and finish what I started when I was 6 years old, I won't be freeing the burning boy. I think I'd be strengthening him. Fourth story. What I found at an abandoned psychiatric hospital. I often visited my grandparents' home in Traverse City in northern Michigan during the summers with my parents. Traverse City, TC, is a beautiful place, produces 75% of the world's cherries, and was home to the Traverse City Regional Psychiatric Hospital, which operated from 1885 to 1989. Since the United States federal government officially deemed the hospital worthy of preservation for its historical significance, the buildings on the hospital grounds were guarded by patrolling security guards. The TC Psychiatric Hospital was massive, including 70 or 80 buildings of various sizes. Some buildings have now been converted into restaurants, gift shops, tourism traps, cafes, etc., but many remain empty and abandoned. Underneath the hospital is a sprawling brick tunnel system, which the hospital staff used to safely transport the patients from building to building in the frigid winter temperatures. I'm sure there were instances where the patients underwent cruel treatments or were subjected to the care of horrible doctors. But the TC Psych Hospital had a great reputation. Many teenagers, including myself at the time, were unashamedly fascinated with the hospital and its history. As a result, we would often break into abandoned buildings through unbarred windows or doors with pickable padlocks. While there were a few cases where teens would get caught and charged with breaking and entering, as long as we were stealthy, stuck to our safe entrances, and paid attention to the guards' patrol patterns, we could go in and out without worry. I'm not advocating for or trying to justify my criminal act of B&E, but breaking into the old hospital was almost a rite of passage for the TC teens. The hospital's interior was terrifying. There was old, stained, and broken equipment and furniture, crumbling floors and walls, vandalism, strange old building noises, and complete and utter darkness in the tunnels, basements, and lower floors. Using flashlights was too risky with the guards patrolling, so we often navigated the hospital by memory and our dimly lit phone screens. As you can imagine, our frightened, youthful imaginations ran wild with horror stories, which is pretty ironic considering we made up most of those stories. Unfortunately, during my last trip inside, I encountered something that terrified me to the point I swore off ever returning. The story takes place around 10 p.m. The moonlight was dim, and most patrol guards left for the day. Clad in black, my friend Jason and I entered through the same window we always used and followed our regular path to one of the tall jutting spires to sit by the windows that overlooked the entire city. There was only one thing different about this venture from our others: a new faint and unexplainable smoky odor. Not smoky like fire, but something more akin to incense. The smell was so faint we almost thought we were imagining it, but it grew stronger as we got closer to our destination. Rather than taking the stairs that led up to the spire, we followed the smell down a different hallway until we reached a room with a deep red glow emanating from the doorway. Rather than doing the smart thing by leaving immediately, we couldn't resist the urge to walk closer and investigate. When we finally reached the room, I audibly gasped and felt Jason grip my wrist so hard his nails left marks on my skin. We found a large ring of red votive candles and burning incense circling a drawing of a pentagram with the sigil of Baphomet. In the center of the drawing was a dead, bloodied bird surrounded by black feathers. Bear in mind that I was raised devoutly Catholic, so seeing this image filled me with a sense of fear stronger and more paralyzing than any ghost sighting ever could. Later on that night, Jason told me I immediately started mumbling prayers, but I personally don't remember doing that. I wouldn't be too terribly surprised, though. While the duration felt infinite, I'm not sure how long we stared at the occult scene before hearing a man's low and ominous voice behind us saying, "Welcome, friends." I promise you that there was absolutely nothing friendly about the way that guy greeted us. Jason and I screamed bloody murder, whipped around, and saw two nicely dressed but frazzled-looking adult men smiling at us. The man in front of me held something in his hand, and while I can't say for sure what it was, I remember thinking it was a knife at the time, which wouldn't be too crazy of a guess considering they recently sacrificed a bird. Jason and I sprinted past the two, and I felt someone's fingers grab the back of my shirt. Thankfully, the occultist's hand didn't have a solid hold on me because I ducked and managed to escape his grip. The men shouted for us to stop running. We obviously didn't. We heard their footsteps chasing after us for a little while, but thankfully Jason and I had broken into the hospital so many times that running through the unlit rooms, hallways, and tunnels was no challenge. When we finally reached and vaulted through our escape window, the occultists were nowhere to be seen or heard. We kept running through the hospital grounds until we reached Jason's car with no concern for the patrol guards. We would have rather gotten caught by the guards than the occultists. I puked twice in the parking lot, whether the cause was fear, sprinting nonstop for a mile and a half, or a combination of both. I'm not sure what would have happened if the occultists caught us, but I know for certain they weren't going to crack open a beer and sing Kumbaya by the candlelight. I'm not familiar with cultic practices or satanic rituals, so I'm not sure what the men were trying to do or if they were summoning something. Jason and I never returned to the hospital during that summer or any of the following summers. While we aren't close now that we're adults, I know that horrifying experience will keep us cemented in each other's memories until we die. Fifth story, Cane Hill Asylum. Last year, a friend of mine was getting a small business set up doing ghost walks of an abandoned Victorian mental asylum called Cane Hill. The amount of legalities involved caused it to be a long-winded process that sadly never came to fruition. Perhaps this was for the best. Due to the state of the building, only certain parts could be used for his planned ghost walk. Fires set by local louts had destroyed some parts, and other parts were unsafe structurally, which was a shame as some really interesting areas were off limits. However, some of the wards and patient rooms were very much fine, albeit overgrown and in some state of disrepair. I've never been one for the paranormal, and the hospital didn't freak me out. Ironically, my friend, the ghost walk tour guide, was creeped out by the place and wouldn't go there alone. I was admittedly taking the piss out of him a lot for it. Basically, every time we went there, I would make him jump or freak him out, pretend to be possessed, or tell him I could hear voices, etc. One evening, I got him worse than I had done before. I hid underneath a bed, just as he turned his back. He genuinely thought something had spirited me away and near enough wet himself. When I revealed myself to him, I felt bad. He had tears in his eyes. He then challenged me to spend a few hours that evening in the hospital, alone, betting that I couldn't. I accepted. I'm terrible for betting. It got to about 6 p.m., and it was rapidly getting dark, and Tom, my friend, was leaving. "Try not to shit your pants too much tonight, gay boy," he said before getting into his car. "Yeah, bye. Try not to shit your pants at every little noise you hear," I replied. He smirked as he drove off, and I made my way back inside. I had a near fully charged phone with me, good signal both for calls and internet, so I was relatively happy. It got to about 8 p.m. All had been quiet when I heard a voice croak hello from somewhere in the room. Admittedly, I near enough shat myself. I froze in place. "Hello," it croaked again. Hello." I replied. "What you doing here?" it said. The voice contained a hint of threat. I was still pretty much shitting myself, and then I noticed a small intercom panel on the wall opposite me, above head level but in the direction the voice was coming from. That fucker, I thought to myself. I was impressed. Tom was clearly testing this out for his tours. I thought I'd play along. No doubt he had invented some insane character to freak me out with. And in all fairness, he was trying to develop a genuine experience for his business, and I wanted him to succeed. Me and Tom began conversing. He told me how he had recently raided a house and kidnapped the entire family and had brought them to the asylum to operate on them. I then heard another voice, a woman. She sounded scared and was begging for mercy. I was genuinely unsettled. Tom had outdone himself and had even gone as far as hiring voice actors. Then the operations and rapes began. The man gave a gruesome, detailed account of what he was doing to each family member. His account was broken by their screams and cries for help. It was only when he started talking about defiling the corpse of a child that I told him to just stop. It was too much, and people wouldn't want to hear it. He went silent and didn't say another word. I tried talking a couple of times, but got nothing. I think I'd hurt Tom's feelings. I could tell he had tried hard with the character, and, necrophilia aside, he had done a good job. Morning came around, and I found myself waking up, not realizing I had drifted off. What woke me was the sound of a car approaching. I made my way out front to find Tom there, arms crossed with a skeptical look on his face. "Scary time?" he asked. "Oh, terrifying, you crazy bastard," I responded. He gave me a funny smile, and we went inside to the ward. "Oh, as good as you were," I started. "I spotted your intercom straight away. Might want to try actually hiding it when you're guiding people around." "Intercom? What are you on about? Were you doing drugs last night? I don't play stupid with me, Tom. Your psycho character that talked to me all night through that intercom there," I said, pointing. Tom walked over to it and examined it close up. "Mate, this is a vent into the next room." Sixth story. I worked at a haunted mental hospital. I'm a retired psychiatrist. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, I worked at a particular mental hospital before it was closed due to the psychiatry reform. Most of the time, I don't think about what I saw there at all. But last night, I had a nightmare about the fire. My granddaughter asked me about it, and when I told her a few carefully selected stories, she suggested I share my story online. Anyways, I think the first one I remember was being in a meeting room with a new patient. We can call him Eric. He was sitting opposite of me, slouched in the chair and sullen, with intense eyes and his hands cuffed to the table. I remembered from reading the old notes about him that he had been deemed incapable of standing trial after he murdered his sister's father-in-law. But strangely, any notes about his diagnosis seemed to not have made it into his paperwork. He was lean, on the verge of being gaunt, and even without knowing why he was at the hospital, I could feel danger rolling off of him. Mind, he wasn't the first killer I've worked with, so while he was a bit unnerving, I knew how to handle him. When asking him about his family, he kept to short answers, though I got the impression that the only one he had really been close to was his sister, with his father an abusive drunk. She was a couple of years older than him, and married their well-off neighbor's son. He also kept rather quiet as to why he'd killed his father-in-law, staring at me with a gaze that held a flickering flame as he asked why it even mattered. During the meeting, I started feeling really warm, like the ventilation system wasn't working, and I smelled something acrid, like smoke. At first it was faint, and I dismissed it entirely. And then I started asking Eric about his childhood in more detail. For these questions, I told Eric, try to keep an even and calm tone. "I'm not trying to judge you. I'm here to listen and help you, not judge." He snorted derisively and rolled his eyes. Not at me personally, it seemed, thankfully, so I pushed on. "When you were younger, did you set any fires? Did you hurt anyone or anything? Animals, younger children?" He glared at me, the heat flaring up, with him almost looking outlined in a strange orange-red glow. "You think I hurt young ones?" "Never." He tugged on the cuffs that kept him bound to the table, and on his skin a sheen of sweat as the scent became more powerful. "All I did, everything I've done, was to protect." His words faded into a crackling of fire as smoke billowed around the table, and coughing I looked away. When I looked back, I was in my office. In front of me lay a folder from the archives, slightly smoke-damaged with a bit of charring on the edge, and as I gingerly opened it, a sepia photo of Eric met my eyes. The fire I mentioned? It took place in the 40s. No one figured out how it started, but several patients died, and it led to the authorities investigating how the hospital was ran. He had died there, buried on the mainland. And still, it seemed, like so many others, he hadn't left the hospital. Seventh story. I work in a hospital. I think I saw a ghost. Posting this here because my coworkers think I'm full of crap and laughed at me, but I know what I saw. I was wheeling a trolley of paperwork down the hallway. I saw a woman standing in the hall. There was no one else around, very rare, and the second I saw her, I got goosebumps on my arms. She wasn't moving. She didn't look like she was lost. She was just standing there looking at. Nothing, I guess. There was just a wall there. We made eye contact as I walked past her, and I swear I felt heat leaving my body. That's the best way I can explain it. I heard behind me the sound of shuffling, and I looked back to see her now really slowly moving to follow me in the direction I went. I said to myself, I'd ask her if she was okay after I dropped off the paperwork to the office, which was right around the corner from the hallway I saw her in. Here's the thing. I came back out of the office 30 seconds after I saw that woman, and she was nowhere to be found. There was nowhere she could have gone in that short amount of time, especially considering how slowly I saw her walking. She would have only made it a few meters in the time it took me to go in the office and come back out. I saw a nurse in that corridor on my way back and asked her if she saw the woman. She said no, and she said she didn't see anyone matching her description. The corridor didn't feel cold anymore as I made my way back, and I haven't seen that woman in the hours since. My coworkers think I just imagined her, but the goosebumps and the cold, sinking feeling when we made eye contact were real. I think a hospital of all places would be where you'd see a ghost. I've been working here for a year, but this was the first experience I had that made me think, shit, was that really a ghost? I have no explanation for this. There was nowhere that woman could have gone where I wouldn't have seen her, especially at the speed she was going. This happened hours ago, but I'm still spooked. 8th story. Damisch Mental Hospital. Oregon not scary? There are plenty of creepy places up in northern Oregon at least. I live just down the road from the old mental hospital location of Damisch. It was built in 1961 as one of the only mental hospitals in the state. It was well known for malpractice and mistreatment of the patients, including the practice of lobotomies and shock therapy. Soon after the completion of Damisch, the Living Enrichment Center was built along with underground tunnels connecting the two and a nuclear bunker. Eventually, laws were passed protecting patients, and Damisch was closed in 1992. They just released all of the patients and let them roam free. The LEC was bought up as a giant church empire and eventually dealt with fraud and had to close down, leaving both of the giant locations abandoned. In the early 2000s, it had been decided that Damisch would be torn down to make way for a development that would be built right on top of the site, and because old patients would break in and be found in their old rooms. While digging up the land, they found a lot of old remains of patients that had been secretly buried in unmarked graves because they had been test subjects with no family. To this day, the LEC remains in the overgrown backwoods, and the Villa Boys homes mostly go on unsold, and the ones that have reports of hauntings. Before Damisch was torn down, I know quite a few people that had snuck in only to find blood and writing on walls. Beds and carts were left behind as if everyone just suddenly vanished. I truly feel bad for the people that move in unknowingly. It's horror movie material right there. If you're feeling adventurous and in the Portland metro area, you can still visit, for the underground tunnels and LEC still remain abandoned to this day. 9th story. Riverview Mental Hospital. I'm a PA, which means production assistant. It sounds fancier than it actually is. Pretty much, you watch one thing for 12 to 15 hours to make sure nothing gets stolen. Like a generator, which someone can easily hook up to their truck and drive off with it. Or you're watching an unlocked door, so no one unauthorized comes in. Security is a better term, but without credentials/training. Just stand there, look pretty, and hope no weirdos come your way. Or you're screwed. I would be anyways. One day, I was at Riverview Mental Hospital in Coquitlam, British Columbia. For those who don't know, it's, or was, a mental institution. It has been shut down for a decent number of years now. A lot of movies and TV productions use the space for filming. You probably heard of Supernatural, X-Files, Smallville, The Magicians, etc. Anyways, I was posted out back of East Lawn Building watching the back entrance and also the generator. The crew had already moved down to the cafeteria to film there, but someone needed to stay up here to keep watching. I pulled a short straw. Even though Riverview is a good distance away from other people, there was still a section of Riverview open for addicts in recovery. So we still need to keep watch to ensure no one wanders in the building. The cafeteria was a bit down from the East Lawn Building, and my walkie was just out of range. I had to pee really badly and hoped someone was coming soon to relieve me. Yet I said, I hadn't seen a soul in sight and decided to run in and quickly use the bathroom. It was just inside the doors, past the eerie, empty kitchen. It felt so good to relieve my bladder. On my way back out, I saw a dark figure from the corner of my eye in the kitchen. I turned my head to look, but no one was there. "Hello," I said, wondering if it was someone from set decoration coming to clean some stuff up. No one responded, so I kept walking towards the doors. I then heard shuffling of footsteps, which sounded like it was right behind me. I gasped and turned around, faster than my brain could think twice. Of course, no one there. "Okay, obviously you won't respond, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security," hoping he or she won't catch my bluff that my radio was out of range. "If you're lost, just follow my voice. I'm close to the exit. If it were me and I didn't know where the bathroom was, I'd get lost too." I saw a boy, maybe 7, poke his head out from behind the counter. I was shocked to see someone so young here. Maybe visiting someone and wandered off. "Hi there. Are you lost?" He shook his head and fully came out from behind the counter. "Where is your family or guardian?" He then shrugged and started walking towards me. I held my hand out to him. "Come on, we'll go outside and I'll call for help." Or try to. I could see him more clear now that he was approaching sunlight. He looked very pale, as if he hadn't seen the light of day in months. The skin around his eyes were a dark color, and his lips were bluish. It was weird, but it was a cold day. His shirt was a dark gray, and his slacks looked worn. Poor kid. He looked at me weird, his eyebrows forwarding, and he winced his eyes. He looked mad. I felt a bit confused. He reached his hand out for mine, and he said, "Follow my voice." It wasn't his voice, though. It was mine coming out of his mouth. I froze in fear, watching him get closer. Why couldn't I move? "Angela," said a sharp voice from the door. I snapped out of it and turned toward my manager. He looked disappointed. "Is your radio dead or something?" I looked down to see the boy, but he wasn't there. I started looking around me, frantically. "What are you doing?" he said, now irritated. "Where did he go?" I said, surprisingly loud. "Who?" Still irritated. The boy that was right here." I pointed beside me. There was no one there. "Anyways, listen, I was coming to give you a break, but it looks like you already had one." I looked at him, and I could tell he saw the fear in my eyes. His facial expressions relaxed, and he said, "Let's go. They've wrapped out at the cafeteria. We can take it from here. Security will watch this post. You can go home. You look tired." My fear turned to anger, as if he didn't believe me. I stormed off toward my car and left, hands still shaking. Later that night, I tried to look up young boys who died in the hospital, but came to a dead end. I decided to give up and go to bed. The next morning, I saw I had a missed phone call from Earl, the nighttime supervisor. He left a voicemail, and I listened to it. "Listen, Angela, whatever game you're playing, you need to stop." In the background of the message, I heard me saying, "Follow my voice." I was very confused and panicked. I rushed to get to Riverview. When I got there were cops surrounding the East Lawn back entrance. My post. I could hear sobs from my crew and policemen asking people questions. "Isn't it ironic?" said one cop. "A guy dies of a heart attack in a hospital, but no one can help." He shook his head. I found my manager and asked him what happened. "Earl. He died last night from a heart attack. He was only 45, he said, very saddened. I looked over the crew towards the entrance to the building. There, at the door, stood the boy. My heart froze. He mouthed, "Follow my voice," and smiled. An unearthly smile, like he had no cheekbones. The corner of his mouth almost reached his ears. He then slowly walked inside and disappeared. 10th story. I'm a nurse in a haunted hospital. We don't tell the patients these stories. I work as a nurse in a post-surgical unit in the biggest hospital in my city. Patients come from hundreds of miles away to get their operations here. The surgeons are known to be the best. But what we don't tell the patients, what we're not supposed to tell them, is that there are ghosts here. Just like any other hospital, people pass away and their spirits sometimes linger, or maybe it is just a fragment of them that remains behind, something that science can't explain yet. There have been more than a few events that have raised the hair on the back of my neck, and some have sent me into hysterical screaming fits. But those types of reactions are frowned upon in the hospital. So I try to stay calm. There was that time a few months ago when a patient told me she felt like there were 3 other people in the ward room with her in each of the other 3 beds around her. They were talking back and forth and whispering, she said. But the weird thing was she was alone in the 4-bedroom. I pulled back the curtains and showed her myself. All of the other beds were empty, and there were no visitors or staff in the room with her. As if that weren't disturbing enough, a few weeks later, a different patient said the exact same thing when she had been left alone in the same room. She described it exactly the same way, saying they were whispering back and forth, and it was keeping her awake. I felt a chill up my spine when she told me that, but reassured her that the room was empty, and she was simply imagining things. People have enough to worry about when they're recovering from surgery. We don't need them fretting about specters and ghosts when they should be worried about physio and discharge appointments, lifting restrictions, and medication adjustments. So we keep these stories to ourselves. Some nurses said they couldn't sleep in a certain storage room during breaks on night shift, since they had too many bad experiences there. When I asked them about it, they said they'd had bad dreams and felt like someone was in the room with them, standing over them while they slept. I didn't believe in those things myself, so I slept in there on the night shift and found out firsthand why nobody else wanted to use it as a nap room during breaks. I had the most realistic waking dream I'd ever had, where I'd awoken in the storage room and felt like someone was in there with me, watching me from the corner of the room, their dark outline visible in the dim room. While I wanted to turn on the lights, they didn't work, and the door wouldn't open, and for some reason in my dream, which seemed like reality, I chose to lie back down and go to sleep again, while the thing crept closer and closer, vanishing only to reappear just above me. It felt like my eyes were open the whole time, and I was forced to watch, paralyzed, as it hovered over top of me. For what felt like hours, it was watching me while I slept, as I struggled and was unable to move. I finally came to my senses and finished my break early, going back to work and trying to forget about the horrible experience. But I refused to sleep in that storage room again. There was another event which haunts me to this day, especially since I'm heading in for a night shift right now, in just a few minutes. Another nurse told me a story on the night shift last week, and I've been thinking about it a lot since then, and it's been occupying my mind more and more, especially when I'm alone in the break room at night. We have a staff room where there are 2 small couches and a TV. Some nurses go in there to sleep during breaks on the night shift, and we try our best not to wake them up. She was sleeping on the couch there one night, and a bright light woke her up. There's an adjoining room with a bathroom and lockers, so she figured one of the nurses had gone in there and left the light on. I looked over at the door, she told me. You know how it has that little glass window, and you can see through to the other side? Yeah, I said. I see it every day. So, there's this woman on the other side of the door, and she's looking at me through the glass. I got shivers up my spine when she said this. Maybe because it was the night shift, maybe because that was where I was going on my break in an hour to sleep, or at least try to. And so I see her there, but she's not really looking at me. She's just kind of staring straight ahead. And the first thing I notice about her is her hair. It was in this very old-fashioned sort of style, not like anything you'd see today. It was like it was from the 70s or earlier maybe. And she was wearing these funky blue pinstripe scrubs and a nurse's cap. You know, nobody wears a cap anymore these days. And those scrubs, they look like the ones, you know, in the lobby, how they have those ones on display. From way back when, yeah, they look just like that. I was nodding along, able to picture all of it, as if I was there with her. Another nurse walked in and heard us. What are you guys talking about? Ghosts, I replied simply. He scoffed. You guys believe in that stuff? The 2 of us shared a knowing look. He hadn't been working on the floor long enough to have seen them himself. And some people just aren't attuned to these things. The nurse went back to her story. So she's just standing there, staring straight ahead. And I thought it was the foreigners at first, because sometimes they come in during a night shift and use the bathroom or whatever. So I yelled at her, "Hey, turn that light off, will ya? I'm trying to sleep in here." But she just kept staring straight ahead. So I just put the pillow over my head and tried to sleep some more. Then when I woke up later on and that light was still on. So I asked around. Nobody came in there during the night. And that room is locked, so it wasn't a patient. And I saw the 4 nurses later on, and they were not dressed like that. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who it was, though. According to her, the woman was the ghost of a nurse who had died driving home after a long night shift and had fallen asleep at the wheel. Based on the description she'd given, an older co-worker had recognized her. She'd said that was exactly what an old nurse who used to work there looked like. And from that point on, the nurse who told me this story always remembered to stay awake behind the wheel on the drive home. Every time my eyes start to blink and I'm getting tired, man, I think about that old nurse with the curly gray hair standing behind the glass, and I'm wide awake again. Better than a frickin' cup of coffee, I'll tell you. Something occurred to me as she finished the story. That's really weird. My patient in room 14 told me last night that they saw someone peeking their head in the room and looking at them. And sometimes they would stand in the doorway and just stare at them for a while. She said the person had a very old-fashioned haircut and old-fashioned scrubs. She thought it was a ghost or maybe a hallucination. Ghosts and hallucinations are commonplace on the post-surgical floor, and sometimes it can be difficult to tell the two apart. Pain medication-induced post-operative delirium is not unheard of, especially in the elderly. She thought it was the Dilaudid. So none of that tonight. Just sticking with Tylenol. Good idea, the other nurse said, and I excused myself. I figured I'd check on my patients, especially the ones in room 14. I was somewhat unsurprised to see a woman in blue pinstripe scrubs with a cap looking in at them from the doorway. Despite my terror, I began to walk on shaky legs down the hall towards her. She turned to look at me and went away from the patient's room, going down the side hall at the end of the unit. I ran to catch up with her, needing to see for myself who she was. When I got to the end of the hall, I looked to the left. She was gone, but it had only been a few seconds. I ran down the short length of hallway to the next corridor. This other one was much, much longer. She could not have disappeared so quickly unless she went into a patient room. But again, she was gone. My heart hammering in my chest. I refused to believe it was a ghost. Such things didn't exist. They just couldn't. Room 9 was the only one she could have gone into in such a hurry. I went in and found all of the patients were wide awake, despite the late hour of the night. It was 3 a.m., and everyone should have been asleep. "It's freezing in here. Can you give me a warm blanket?" asked the patient by the door. I told her I would, and she nearly screamed in fright. "Oh my goodness," the old woman said, startled. "I didn't see you there." "So who were you talking to?" I asked. "The other nurse. The one who just came in. Where did she go?" I felt a presence behind me and looked to see the shape of something moving, but then it was gone like a wisp of smoke on a windy day. Not wanting to tell the woman it had been a ghost, I just made up an excuse and told the woman I'd get her a warm blanket. Nothing seemed to help, though. None of the patients in that room slept very well that night, if at all. They kept saying they felt like there was something laying in the bed right next to them. Come to think of it, it's the same room where patients kept imagining other people were in the room with them. Except this time it really was full. I haven't seen the ghost nurse since that night, and I'm hoping I never do again. It's terrifying to say the least, since I don't really understand why she's here. And you never know exactly when she's going to show up. I'm heading into work for another night shift now. Wish me luck. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.